golden handcuffs. The scent of vanilla and caramelized sugar filled the small kitchen as Camille Laurent carefully piped delicate rosettes onto her signature lavender crème brûlée. At 32, she had finally found her rhythm in the culinary world, her little patisserie in the heart of Nice becoming something of a hidden gem among locals and tourists alike. "Mademoiselle Laurent?" A voice cut through her concentration. "There's someone here to see you." Camille looked up to find her assistant, Emily, standing in the doorway, eyes wide with what appeared to be awe. Behind her stood a man Camille recognized instantly from business magazines and social media, Rowan Blackwood, the British-American real estate developer whose properties dotted skylines across 3 continents. "Your raspberry and dark chocolate tart is quite possibly the most extraordinary thing I've ever tasted," he said, his voice deep and measured, confidence emanating from him like heat from an oven. "I'd like to commission you to cater an event I'm hosting next month." That encounter, seemingly random, was the beginning of what Camille would later recognize as the most beautiful trap she'd ever walked into. Within 6 weeks, Rowan was no longer just a client, but a fixture in her life, sending rare ingredients from his travels, upgrading her kitchen equipment without being asked, and eventually convincing her to close early just to spend evenings with him. "You have extraordinary talent," he told her one night as they sipped champagne on his yacht. "But you're wasting it in that tiny shop. With the right backing, you could have patisseries in every major city." By the 3-month mark, Camille found herself swept into Rowan's world. Her modest apartment exchanged for a penthouse suite in his Côte d'Azur property. Her local suppliers replaced by exclusive purveyors Rowan had connections with. Even her wardrobe had transformed. Designer pieces appeared as gifts, always with the subtle suggestion that they would be perfect for this dinner or that event. "I just want to see you shine," he'd say whenever she hesitated about the changes. "Is it so wrong to want to give you the world?" And Camille, who had spent years struggling to keep her small business afloat, found herself unable to articulate why receiving everything she'd ever wanted left her feeling strangely hollow. The proposal came at 8 months. A platinum ring with a diamond so large Camille felt its weight might pull her hand to the ground. It happened during a surprise trip to Venice, with a photographer conveniently present to capture the moment for Rowan's social media empire. "We're perfect together," Rowan said. Not quite a question, more a statement of fact. "Say yes, and I'll make sure you never have to worry about anything again." As wedding preparations began, Rowan insisting on handling everything, Camille noticed the subtle shifts. Her phone calls with her sister became shorter, as Rowan always seemed to need her attention. Her weekly visits to her parents' home dwindled as Rowan scheduled events that couldn't be missed. Her once active social media accounts for her patisserie were now managed by Rowan's PR team, showcasing not her creations, but her transformation into his perfect partner. "Trust me," became Rowan's mantra. "I know what's best." And Camille, watching her dreams being reshaped into someone else's vision, smiled and nodded, ignoring the voice inside that whispered she was slowly disappearing. Whispers at the rehearsal. The Amalfi Coast sparkled beneath a perfect June sky as Camille stood on the balcony of Villa Simbrone, watching staff arrange flowers worth more than her old patisserie's monthly revenue. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Blackwood in front of 300 guests, most of whom she'd never met, but who Rowan insisted were essential connections. The dress arrived, announced Vivian, the wedding planner Rowan had hired. Mr. Blackwood made some last-minute adjustments with the designer. Camille's stomach tightened. "Adjustments? But we finalized everything weeks ago." "Just some embellishments he thought would photograph better," Vivian replied with practiced diplomacy. "He has quite the eye for detail." Another change, another decision made without her input. Camille nodded mechanically, adding it to the mental list of things she'd surrendered control over. The guest list. The menu, ironic for a chef. Even the honeymoon destination remained a surprise. As evening fell, the rehearsal dinner unfolded like a theatrical production. Rowan, impeccable in his tailored suit, captivated their guests with stories of their romance. stories that sounded beautiful but felt increasingly like fiction to Camille. She smiled at all the right moments while questioning when she had become more prop than partner. "You should eat something," murmured Theodora, Rowan's elegant mother, sliding a plate toward Camille. "You'll need your strength." Something in the older woman's tone made Camille look up, catching an expression that seemed almost sympathetic. As the evening progressed, Camille excused herself to the powder room, needing a moment away from Rowan's hand perpetually guiding the small of her back. In the hallway, her phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. She nearly dismissed it before the preview caught her eye. "About Rowan. Important. Please read." Inside a pristine bathroom that cost more than her parents' house, Camille opened the message. "My name is Diana Winters. I was Rowan's executive assistant until last year. Tomorrow you're making a terrible mistake. I was also PA to his ex-fiancée Bethany, and the one before her, Sonia. There's a pattern. First, he isolates them from friends and family. Then he redesigns their careers to complement his image. When they start questioning things, the surveillance begins, tracking apps, security personnel." Bethany tried to leave. "The NDA she signed to avoid financial ruin prevents me from saying more, but I've attached photos of hospital records with names redacted. I'm risking everything sending this. Block this number after reading. He monitors communications. Please be smarter than the others." Attached were medical documents showing treatments for unexplained injuries and psychiatric evaluations for anxiety disorders. Cold dread pooled in Camille's stomach as she recognized symptoms mirroring her own increasing nervousness around Rowan's disapproval. When she emerged, pale-faced, Rowan immediately appeared at her side. "There you are, darling. I was about to send someone to find you." His smile was perfect, but his eyes tracked her phone as she slipped it into her clutch. "Just needed a moment," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Well, don't disappear again. The Sorianos are eager to discuss that Tokyo property. I've mentioned your interest in expanding there." "Tokyo?" This was the first Camille had heard of it. "Of course. After the wedding, we'll need to focus on building your brand internationally." He kissed her cheek, whispering, "You seem tense. I've asked the staff to draw you a bath later. You should rest. Big day tomorrow." As he guided her back to the party, Camille felt the weight of Diana's message. Was this concern genuine or merely jealousy from a former employee? But as the night wore on, she observed Rowan with new awareness, how he subtly cut off her sentences, redirected conversations away from her opinions, monitored her food and drink intake under the guise of attentiveness. In their suite that night, as Rowan slept, Camille silently opened her laptop. She searched for his previous engagements, finding only glowing articles about amicable separations and mutual decisions to part ways. But when she dug deeper, using keywords from Diana's message, troubling patterns emerged. Ex-partners who had virtually disappeared from public life, careers abandoned, and in one case, a restraining order that had been mysteriously dropped. Dawn was breaking when Camille finally closed the laptop, clarity washing over her like the Mediterranean sunlight filtering through the curtains. The woman who had arrived in Italy ready to say, "I do," now faced an entirely different kind of decision, one that would require more courage than she thought she possessed. The moment of courage, the wedding of Rowan Blackwood and Camille Laurent, was destined to appear in society magazines across Europe. The 12th century cliffside cathedral overlooked waters so blue they seemed painted. Celebrities and business titans filled the pews, while arrangements of white peonies and jasmine perfumed the air. A string quartet played Pachelbel, and sunlight streamed through ancient stained glass, creating a scene of storybook perfection. In a private antechamber, Camille stood before a full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself in the couture gown Rowan had improved, now more revealing, more elaborate, less like anything she would have chosen. Her hair had been styled to his specifications, her makeup applied by his preferred artist. Even her bouquet had been modified that morning without consultation. 5 minutes, announced Vivienne, before adding with unusual gentleness, "Are you all right, Ms. Laurent?" Camille nodded automatically, though her reflection showed a woman with fear shadowing her eyes. After Vivian departed, she reached beneath layers of tulle and silk to the pocket she'd secretly sewn that morning, feeling for the small thumb drive containing everything she'd discovered overnight, along with backup copies of Diana's message sent to secure email accounts. Her father appeared at the door, resplendent in a tuxedo Rowan had provided, looking uncomfortable but proud. "Ready, ma chérie?" "Papa," Camille whispered. "If I do something unexpected today, something that might seem shocking, will you still support me?" Confusion crossed his weathered face. "What do you mean?" "Just promise, please." His expression softened as he took her trembling hands. "From the day you were born, Camille, always." The processional began, and Camille walked down the aisle, each step heavy with dread rather than anticipation. Rowan waited at the altar, devastatingly handsome and smiling with triumph rather than joy. As she reached him, he took her hands possessively. "Perfect," he murmured. But his gaze wasn't on her face. It was surveying her appearance, assessing his creation. The priest began the ceremony, his words echoing through the cathedral about love, honor, and respect. With each sacred promise described, Camille felt the dissonance between these vows, and the reality she now understood awaited her. If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. Traditional words rarely interrupted. The momentary silence hung in the air. Camille drew a deep breath. "I do." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. "That comes later." "Darling," Rowan whispered, tightening his grip on her hands, his smile never faltering though his eyes hardened. "No," Camille said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I know of a reason." The priest looked bewildered. Rowan's smile became rigid. "Camille," he warned quietly, "don't make a scene." But something had broken open inside her, fear giving way to clarity, silence to truth. "I can't marry you, Rowan." Her voice gained strength with each word. "Not when I know about Bethany and Sonia." The color drained from his face, though his expression remained carefully controlled. "Whatever you think you know," the hospital records, the NDAs, the pattern of control that I've been too blind to see happening to me. She turned to face the stunned guests. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but there will be no wedding today." Rowan grabbed her arm, whispering furiously. "You have no idea what you're doing. Everything I've invested in you, invested. Like I'm a property in your portfolio." Camille pulled away. "That's all I am to you, isn't it? Another acquisition?" "Don't be dramatic," he hissed, aware of watching eyes. "We can discuss this privately." "No more private discussions where you tell me what to think." Anger replaced fear as months of suppressed frustration surfaced. "No more redesigning me to fit your image." His facade cracked, revealing a flash of something dangerous. "You ungrateful little—" He reached for her again. The slap echoed through the cathedral before Camille even realized what she'd done. Her palm stung from the contact with his cheek, his head turned sideways from the impact. The collective gasp from 300 guests seemed to pull all oxygen from the room. For one terrible moment, she glimpsed raw fury in Rowan's eyes, a confirmation of everything Diana had warned about. Then, with disturbing speed, his expression transformed back to controlled charm, though a red mark bloomed on his perfect cheek. "My apologies, everyone," he announced with practiced contrition. "It seems Camille is experiencing some pre-wedding anxiety. Perhaps we should postpone—" "No," Camille interrupted, stepping back. "No postponement. No private discussions. No more manipulation." She turned to the congregation. "This wedding is canceled because the man you see before you is not who he pretends to be." "That's enough." Rowan's mask slipped again, his voice sharp as a blade. Camille's father suddenly appeared beside her, followed by her sister who had been a reluctant bridesmaid. "We're leaving," her father stated simply, placing himself between Camille and Rowan. As they moved toward the exit, Rowan called out, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat beneath the concern. "Camille, darling, think about what you're doing. Remember everything I've given you, everything I can take away." She turned back one last time. "Keep it all, Rowan." I'd rather have nothing than live in a gilded cage. With her family flanking her protectively, Camille walked out of the cathedral, leaving behind shocked guests, millions in wedding arrangements, and the phantom future that had nearly consumed her. Aftermath and awakening. The media frenzy was immediate and merciless. Pastry chef slaps billionaire fiancé at altar, screamed headlines across Europe. Paparazzi camped outside her parents' modest home in Nice, where Camille had taken refuge, their flashing cameras turning the quiet street into a circus. Inside, Camille sat at the kitchen table where she'd first learned to bake, now surrounded by family and legal documents. The backlash had been swift and calculated, Rowan's PR machine working overtime to paint her as unstable, ungrateful, and opportunistic. "He's frozen your accounts," her sister Margot said, hanging up the phone after speaking with their cousin who worked at the bank. "And there's an eviction notice for your apartment." "Not surprising," Camille replied, strangely calm. It was his building after all. "He's also threatening to sue for breach of contract," added her father, reviewing papers with a local lawyer they could barely afford. "Something about agreements you signed regarding his business interests." The mountain of paperwork before them revealed the extent of Rowan's planning, contracts embedded with clauses that essentially indentured Camille to his empire, signatures she'd provided on documents she'd never fully read, trusting his assurances that they were just formalities. The weeks following what tabloids called the slap of the season tested Camille's resolve daily. Her professional reputation, carefully built over years, seemed in tatters. Former clients distanced themselves, frightened by Rowan's influence. Suppliers stopped returning calls. The beautiful website for her patisserie disappeared overnight, another asset controlled by Rowan's tech team. "Perhaps I should just apologize publicly." Camille suggested one particularly dark evening, exhaustion etching lines around her eyes. "Say it was a misunderstanding, agree to his settlement terms." "And then what?" her mother asked, placing a cup of herbal tea before her. "Return to a man who makes you afraid? Become the ghost I watched you turning into these past months?" The quiet strength in her mother's words rekindled something in Camille. The next morning, she cut off her expensively highlighted hair, a symbolic severing of Rowan's influence, and contacted Diana Winters. Meeting in a nondescript cafe in Marseille, Diana slid a folder across the table. "I've been collecting evidence for years, not just about you, but patterns across all his relationships. It won't be enough for criminal charges, he's too careful, but it might help with your legal defense." "Why are you risking this for me?" Camille asked. Diana's eyes revealed old wounds. "Because I saw what happened to Bethany when she tried to fight alone, and because someone finally had the courage to expose him, publicly." Armed with Diana's evidence and unexpected support from several of Rowan's business rivals who had their own reasons to see him humbled, Camille's legal team negotiated a settlement. In exchange for her silence about specific allegations, Rowan would drop all lawsuits and financial claims against her. She would walk away with nothing from their relationship, but also without the crushing debt his vengeance would have otherwise ensured. The hardest part was rebuilding. With her savings gone and professional reputation damaged, Camille returned to fundamentals. She rented a tiny kitchen in a working-class neighborhood and began supplying basic pastries to local cafes, working before dawn each day. Some days, when no one ordered her creations or when another former client refused her calls, despair threatened to overwhelm her. On those days, she would touch the simple silver pendant her grandmother had left her, the only piece of jewelry she wore now, having sold every gift from Rowan to fund her fresh start. "Petit à petit, l'oiseau fait son nid," her grandmother used to say. Little by little, the bird builds its nest. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Camille received an unexpected visitor at her small kitchen. Theodora Blackwood stood in the doorway, elegant as ever but somehow softer without her son's presence. "I thought you might refuse to see me," Theodora said. "I considered it," Camille admitted, wiping flour from her hands. "I came to apologize. I should have warned you." Theodora's composure cracked slightly. "I saw the signs, but I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere." "Why now?" Because you did what I never had the courage to do, challenge him publicly. It's changed things. She hesitated. He's seeing a therapist now. Not voluntarily. The board insisted after several executives raised concerns about his behavior. It's not redemption, but perhaps a beginning. After Theodora left, Camille stood in her humble kitchen, surveying the simple tools and ingredients that represented her independence. The road ahead remained difficult, but for the first time since she'd walked out of that cathedral, the future felt like something she was building rather than escaping. That night, she created a new recipe, a phoenix tart with layers of resilience and possibility, and took the first photograph for what would become a completely new professional journey. Finding true north 2 years after the slap that altered the course of her life, Camille stood in Phoenix Patisserie, her new shop. Nestled in the artistic quarter of Lyon, the space was modest compared to what might have been hers in Rowan's world, just 8 tables and a display case. But every element reflected her true aesthetic: warm woods, soft lighting, and displays that prioritized the food rather than opulence. "We've got another order from that boutique hotel in Avignon," announced Olivier, the young apprentice she'd hired fresh from culinary school. "They want 50 of your lavender honey petit fours for some fancy wedding." Camille smiled at the irony. Weddings had become something of a specialty for her reborn business, creating desserts that celebrated genuine love rather than spectacle. The bell above the door chimed, and a tall man with unruly auburn hair entered, a camera bag slung over his shoulder. He ordered in accented French, clearly struggling but determined. "Your French is terrible," she told him in English, smiling to soften the assessment. "American?" "Canadian," he corrected, returning her smile. "Julian Mercer. I'm photographing architecture for a travel magazine." He gestured to her brass espresso machine, including hidden gems like this place. That chance encounter blossomed slowly, naturally. Julian began visiting the patisserie regularly, sometimes working on his laptop in the corner, sometimes just watching Camille with an artist's appreciation for her craft. Unlike Rowan, who had swept her into a whirlwind, Julian moved at a pace that allowed trust to develop organically. On their 5th casual conversation, he asked if he could photograph her pastries for his portfolio. On their 8th, he finally worked up the courage to ask her to dinner. By then, Camille had done her research, confirming he was indeed a legitimate architectural photographer with a small but growing reputation for capturing the soul of spaces rather than just their grandeur. "I should tell you something," she said during their 3rd dinner together, at a family-owned bistro where the chef greeted every guest personally. "I'm somewhat notorious." "The billionaire's runaway bride," Julian nodded, surprising her. "I recognized you the first day, but figured you probably preferred being known for your incredible millefeuille." His understanding, and the fact that he'd waited for her to bring it up, moved her deeply. As months passed, their relationship developed with refreshing honesty. Julian listened more than he spoke, asked questions rather than making declarations, and most importantly, saw Camille as she was rather than as a project to be refined. One evening, as they walked along the Saône River, after closing the patisserie together, Julian now helped on busy days, his large hands surprisingly delicate with pastry decorations. He asked about her plans for the future. "I've been offered a spot in the International Pastry Exhibition," she said, still somewhat amazed by the opportunity. "My Phoenix tart caught the attention of the committee." "That's incredible," Julian replied with genuine enthusiasm. "Will you accept?" Camille hesitated. It would mean being in the spotlight again, possibly facing questions about the past. Julian stopped walking, turning to face her. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you, Camille? Not a scandal or a headline. I see someone who had the courage to walk away from golden handcuffs, someone who rebuilt from ashes. That strength, that authenticity, is what makes your pastries so extraordinary. It's what makes you extraordinary." He didn't try to decide for her or minimize her concerns. Instead, he simply stood beside her as she weighed her options, offering support without pressure. 3 months later, Camille stood nervously backstage at the exhibition. Her Phoenix tart, reimagined on a larger scale with delicate sugarwork representing rebirth, waited on the presentation table. Through the curtain, she could see hundreds of industry professionals, food critics, and yes, even a few society photographers hoping for dramatic moments. "You ready?" Julian asked, adjusting her chef's coat, the simple, unadorned one she'd chosen rather than the elaborate designer version a sponsor had offered. "What if he's out there?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. Though Rowan had moved on publicly, dating a famous actress in a relationship that seemed suspiciously similar to their early days, Camille sometimes still felt the shadow of his influence. Julian smiled gently. Then he'll see exactly what he lost, a woman who didn't need his world to shine. As her name was announced, Camille squared her shoulders and walked onto the stage. The bright lights momentarily blinded her, but when her vision cleared, she saw not judgment in the audience, but anticipation. These people weren't here for scandal. They were here for her craft. "The Phoenix tart began as an act of reclamation," she explained into the microphone, her voice steady. "A reminder that sometimes we must burn away what others want us to be in order to discover who we truly are." As she demonstrated her techniques, Camille caught sight of Julian in the front row, his camera temporarily forgotten as he watched her with undisguised admiration, not for her appearance or status or what she represented, but simply for herself. Later that evening, as they celebrated her second-place finish and the commission offers already flooding in, Julian raised his glass. "To authentic beginnings," he toasted. Camille clinked her glass against his. "And to the courage to walk away when necessary." In that moment, surrounded by genuine success built on her own terms, Camille finally understood the paradox. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't facing danger but refusing to accept a beautiful cage, no matter how much security it promises. Sometimes, true love doesn't arrive with grand gestures and private jets, but in the quiet support of someone who sees you clearly and values what they see. The woman who had once slapped a billionaire at the altar had found something far more valuable than wealth or status. She had found herself, and in doing so, discovered what real partnership looked like.